namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Ukraine has fired American ATACMS missiles into Russia. Moscow is flexing its nuclear muscle and the US has shut its embassy in Kyiv. After 1,000 days of fighting, is this war set to escalate? We'll look at what lies ahead. Meanwhile, China is keen to normalize ties with India. The foreign ministers and defense ministers of both countries have met this week on different occasions in different cities. There's talk of resuming direct flights and more. We'll bring you up to speed. In the Pacific, why is the US upgrading another military base to target China? It's the same place that was used to launch nuclear bombs on Japan in the Second World War. Has Qatar expelled Hamas leaders and why? Are Trump's appointments to the cabinet really absurd and controversial or just dramatic and overanalyzed? In India, the state of Maharashtra went to polls today. We'll tell you why it's such a big prize. Is energy security behind India's outreach to Guyana? Prime Minister Modi is there today. The story of Rafa Nadal and why it's an inspiration to all. Why Arab nations are investing in art and being criticized for it. And understanding obesity. Apparently, people regain their lost weight because fat cells have memory. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Big relief for former Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan. He gets bail in the case relating to the illegal sale of state gifts. But it is unlikely that Imran Khan will walk out of jail as he faces numerous other cases. The former Pakistani Prime Minister has been in jail since August last year. A suicide bomber targets Pakistani troops in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, rams an explosive-laden vehicle into a joint checkpost. More than 10 Pakistani soldiers killed. A breakaway faction of the Pakistani Taliban claims responsibility for the attack. The Indian envoy to the United Nations says the Security Council is stuck in 1945 and does not reflect today's realities. He expressed his dissatisfaction with the pace of progress. 4 of the 5 permanent members back India's bid for a permanent seat at the UNSC, the only exception being China. Iran agrees to cap its stockpile of highly enriched uranium, implements introductory steps to stop adding to its inventory. The United Nations Atomic Watchdog chief welcomes Tehran's decision. Last week, Rafael Grossi traveled to Tehran for talks with the Iranian president. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visits Gaza, offers a $5 million reward for each freed hostage. Reports estimate that there are around 60 living Israeli hostages in Gaza. Netanyahu also promises to ensure that those who help the hostages are allowed to leave Gaza. And a prominent Ugandan opposition leader is reportedly abducted in neighboring Kenya. He later appeared in a military court in Kampala. The incident has raised concerns over Kenya's role in Uganda's crackdown on its opposition. The veteran leader is an ally turned foe of President Museveni. Since 2001, he has run unsuccessfully against the president in 4 elections.
Внимание! Пуск! Есть пуск!
Escalate to de-escalate. It's an old playbook used by the Soviet Union. First, you raise the stakes very high, then you wait for the other side to blink, to de-escalate. Both Russia and Ukraine appear to be using this playbook. Today, the United States shut its embassy in Kyiv. They're expecting a significant Russian airstrike on the city. There was a barrage this morning, but it was repelled by Ukraine's air defenses. Nonetheless, America is advising caution. They're asking citizens to be alert for air raid warnings. But why this escalation now? Because of US President Joe Biden. He's in the lame duck phase of his presidency and he's not holding back. This week, he permitted Ukraine to fire American missiles at Russia. We're talking about the long-range ones, missiles that can strike deep inside Russian territory. Once the permission came, Zelensky did not wait around. On Tuesday, he fired 6 missiles at Russia. American-made ATACMS missiles. These are guided weapons made by Lockheed Martin. Their range is up to 300 kilometers. Ukraine fired 6 of them at a military facility in Bryansk. Russia says 5 of these missiles were shot down and the 6th was damaged in the skies. Some of the debris did fall near the facility, but no damage and no casualties. Ukraine is yet to announce this attack publicly, but Zelensky dropped a major hint. He said, "We have long-range missiles and we will use them."
I'll not go into details. Ukraine has long-range capabilities. Ukraine has long-range drones made in Ukraine. We now have not only one long Neptune. And we now have ATACMS, and we will use them, all of them.
Now, Bryansk is not on the front line. It is located around 120 kilometers inside Russia. So naturally, Vladimir Putin had to respond. He has revised Russia's nuclear doctrine. The earlier one was drafted in 2020. It said that Russia would use nuclear weapons only in response to a nuclear attack. Basically, nukes for nukes. That was a policy. The new one lowers that threshold. It says Russia can use nukes to respond to a conventional attack as well, not just a nuclear attack. The West has slammed Putin's move. They're calling it irresponsible.
There's irresponsible rhetoric coming from Russia, and that is not going to deter our support for Ukraine.
It is not the first time that they threaten with nuclear escalation, which is completely irresponsible. Russia has subscribed to the principle that a nuclear war cannot be won and so must never be fought.
Since the beginning of its war of aggression against Ukraine, it has sought to coerce and intimidate both Ukraine and other countries around the world through irresponsible nuclear rhetoric and behavior.
We have seen Putin do this before. Tweak his nuclear policy, hold drills with nuclear weapons, or threaten a nuclear escalation. It was scary the first time, but does it still carry the same fear? Well, Russia can always use tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine. These are sort of like mini nukes, tactical nuclear weapons. But that depends. The usage depends on the other side too, on whether Ukraine wants to escalate further. Joe Biden is giving them the tools. He has decided to give landmines to Ukraine's army. These are bombs concealed in the ground. They can take out unsuspecting enemy soldiers, basically slow them down. In eastern Ukraine, Russia has been making significant progress. They're capturing village after village. So landmines could help Ukraine slow down Russia. Of course, the worry is civilian casualties. If soldiers cannot spot landmines, neither can civilians. Despite that worry, Joe Biden is giving these weapons to Ukraine. It tells you how desperate he is. And all of this is happening at a very crucial time. A, Donald Trump is waiting in the wings. His allies have slammed Biden's decision. They say that he's encouraging World War III. And B, the war has crossed 1,000 days. Several events were held to mark the day in Kyiv, in Tel Aviv, and in Europe. Take a look at this. So what happens next? All clues point to an escalation. Ukraine says 100,000, 1 lakh North Korean soldiers could be deployed against them. If true, that's a huge number. Plus, the rest of the world is losing interest. Just look at what happened at the G20. The host, Brazil, cut short discussions on Ukraine. They approved the joint declaration 1 day in advance. That too, when Ukraine's allies were not in the room. The joint statement does not slam Russia for the war, nor does it include last year's crucial point. The Delhi G20 declaration said that this is not an era for war. The Rio declaration does not say this. So clearly the world is losing interest, and that sentiment will only be more pronounced when Trump takes charge, which is why both sides are in a hurry. They want to gain the upper hand before Trump forces them to the table. Reports say Russia is open to a ceasefire, but Putin has certain conditions. He won't give up the land seized by Russia. He will not allow Ukraine to join NATO, and he will not freeze the front lines.
The president has also already said that some option of freezing this conflict will not work for us. It is important for us to achieve our goals, which are well known to everyone.
The next couple of weeks promise to be tense. There are two things you should watch out for. The first is the signals from Europe. They have promised to support Ukraine regardless of what Trump does. Let's see if they follow it up. And chances are Russia will try to scare them off, perhaps by using hybrid tactics like cyber attacks or sabotage or assassinations. And we saw that in the Baltic Sea. 2 undersea internet cables were cut this week. The West believes it was sabotage. The NATO chief has also warned about it. He says Russia could shift the front lines to Europe to scare off Ukraine's allies. So that's the first thing to watch out for, Europe's moves. And second, keep an eye on Zelensky. He had a meeting with Trump before the election. He knows that Donald Trump prefers a negotiated end to the war, so Zelensky could try to sway him, maybe by taking the fight to Russia and showing the world that he can win, or by securing some gains as leverage on the table. Either way, one thing is quite clear. Both sides sense 2025 will be a momentous year for the war. They want to have an upper hand heading into it. And that means more escalation before things improve. So the war in Ukraine is heating up. Meanwhile, India and China are mending ties. The thaw on the border has opened more doors for cooperation. China is eager for a quick return to normalcy. Yesterday, the foreign ministers met in Rio. That's S. Jaishankar from India and Wang Yi from China. They had a meeting on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Brazil. And what did they talk about? Broadly, 4 things. Number 1, resuming the Kailash Mansarovar pilgrimage. Number 2, sharing data on border rivers. 3, restarting direct flights between India and China. And 4, media exchanges. India and China are making headway on these fronts. The specifics are still being hashed out, but as tensions on the border ease, other aspects of the relationship are also being normalized. And China is particularly keen on the resumption of flights. Reports say Beijing is looking for a total reset. It wants to get back to doing business with India. That's the term they used, get back to doing business. And why is Beijing so eager? Thanks to the United States. China believes that ties with the US will worsen in the months ahead. In January, Donald Trump will be back in the White House. He has threatened a trade war with China. He wants to slap high tariffs on Chinese imports, tariffs as high as 60%. That's the promise that Donald Trump made during his election campaign. This week, Xi Jinping has warned against such policies.
In an age of flourishing sci-tech revolution, neither decoupling nor supply chain disruption is the solution. Only mutually beneficial cooperation can lead to common development. Small yard, high fences is not what a major country should pursue.
But China doesn't want to take any chances. So it is exploring alternatives, and India is an attractive one. Business owners in Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Beijing are bullish on India. They are pushing for more trade and investment deals. And Wang Yi seems to have passed this message to S. Jaishankar. He also said that both sides need, and I'm quoting, more trust, more mutual trust and less suspicion. This is something that India's army chief has also been saying. That's General Upendra Dwivedi. Last month he said that the PLA, the Chinese military, needs to restore trust. And he's right. It was China that betrayed India's trust by disrupting peace at the border, by sending troops without provocation, and by repeated incursion attempts. So China will have to make amends. Almost a month since the border deal, the disengagement process is complete. Troops on both sides have pulled back from the last remaining flashpoints. Beijing says the progress has been smooth.
According to the recently agreed solution between India and China on border-related issues, the frontline armies of both sides are implementing relevant work, with smooth progress so far.
While disengagement is important, it's just the first step. The process of stabilizing the border is not complete yet. 2 more steps remain: de-escalation and de-induction of troops. What does that mean? Well, de-escalation means scaling down the overall troop presence on both sides, also fewer patrols. And then we have de-induction. De-induction means relocating soldiers from forward positions, also pulling back heavy equipment from the region. India and China are still far from this stage. They've only completed the first step, disengagement. Troops have pulled back from close contact areas. The larger border remains heavily militarized, though, and considering China's track record, it could flare up again. If the PLA attempts another misadventure, the situation could easily become volatile. So India needs to remain cautious. Last month, Prime Minister Modi met Xi Jinping in Russia on the sidelines of the BRICS summit. It was their first bilateral meeting in 5 years. It happened right after the border agreement was announced. Now, Jaishankar has met Wang Yi in Rio, and India's defense minister has met his Chinese counterpart, that's Rajnath Singh and Dong Jun. This meeting happened today in Laos. We're waiting to see what came out of it, but it's safe to assume that the border situation was discussed. That's 3 high-level meetings in a month. Clearly, engagements have resumed at the top level. It's a positive sign. India must engage and hope to make progress without letting its guard down. Our next story is about the US, about American military activity in the Pacific Ocean. The US is upgrading its capabilities in the region. It is doubling up its offensive power. How? By resurrecting a deserted old airfield in the Northern Mariana Islands. First, take a look at what we are talking about. These are the Northern Mariana Islands. 14 islands make up this archipelago. And it's an unincorporated US territory. Basically, it's an American colony in the Pacific Ocean. The US had captured these islands during the Second World War to use them as forward bases against Japan. The Americans built 3 airfields in the Northern Marianas to house B-29 Super Fortress bombers, the same bombers that dropped nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Both the B-29s that bombed those Japanese cities took off from the Tinian Island. Tinian is one of the largest islands in the Northern Marianas, and it became the starting point for the nuking of Japan. Now, that very same Tinian airfield is being brought back, this time to face a different enemy, China. It's no secret that the US views China as its greatest threat. Washington believes that Beijing is a threat to American dominance and to regional stability in the Indo-Pacific. China has picked fights with almost all of its neighbors: Japan, the Philippines, Vietnam, Bhutan, India, not to mention the constant threats to invade Taiwan. Beijing is a regional menace, and most of its targets are American allies. The US has promised to protect allies like Japan and the Philippines. It has also vowed to defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion. So the US needs to have a military presence in the Pacific to deter Chinese aggression and to launch quick strikes in case of a war. That is where the Northern Marianas come in. The Tinian base has been used for strikes before, It was deserted after the Second World War. The US focused on other bases instead. But now Tinian is being revived. The US is spending $800 million on Tinian. About half of that money is to rehabilitate the airfield. The Americans are fixing up old, degraded runways, getting them ready for modern aircraft. And that is not all. The other half of the $800 million is being spent on training facilities, base camps, practice ranges, landing zones, the works. The US plans to conduct drills in Tinian to get troops battle ready, right on China's doorstep. Now, Tinian isn't the only base in the region, not by a long shot. The biggest American base is in nearby Guam. That's just about 200 kilometers away. Guam has it all: Air Force bases, naval facilities, even an operations base for the US Marines. When it comes to forward bases, Guam is the tip of the spear. Tinian won't be replacing Guam. Instead, it will be a backup, a secondary launch pad in case Guam is somehow compromised. The US has no shortage of bases in the Indo-Pacific. It has military facilities in multiple countries, in Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Australia. There are multiple American outposts in all these countries. But Guam is different. It is American territory, completely immune to foreign politics. And Tinian will be the same. When it is revived, the US will have two fully owned forward bases in the Pacific, two American-run facilities pointed at China, alongside all the bases in allied countries. It may sound like overkill, but this is their China containment plan. It's part of US President Joe Biden's Indo-Pacific strategy. Biden has been ramping up American military presence in the region to contain the threat from China, and Tinian is part of this containment strategy. Now, normally, this would not bode well. Biden is on his way out. Donald Trump will become president in a couple of months. So a lot of Biden's plans will get torn up. But Tinian's resurrection may continue because the base will work for Trump as well. Trump, as you know, is a China hawk, so expect Tinian's importance to grow in the coming years. For our next story, let's go back in history. The year was 2007. Hamas won the elections in Gaza. Most of the world did not recognize this win, except two countries, Turkey and Qatar. Hamas would go on to rule Gaza. Qatar would back them, both financially and politically. So in the year 2011, then US President Barack Obama had a request for Doha. He asked them to provide a base for Hamas, to set up a new office. So Qatar's role was simple: to act as a mediator between Hamas and the world. So Hamas set up its political office in the Qatari capital of Doha. Its top leaders started living there, often in luxurious villas in the suburbs. And that continued even after the Gaza war. Hamas was fighting. They were fighting Israel. But the top leadership was in Doha. Not anymore, though. Yesterday, Qatar issued a statement. It said Hamas leaders are no longer in Doha.
Leaders of Hamas that are within the negotiating team are now not in Doha, and as you know, they move between different capitals. I don't want to get into the details of what that means, but what I can tell you very clearly is that the office of Hamas in Doha was created for the sake of the mediation process. Obviously, when there is no mediation process, the office itself doesn't have any function other than being part of the mediation process.
So the first question is, where did they go? Where are the Hamas leaders? As you heard him say, they're not in Doha. That's what Qatar says. They're not in Doha. But they did not say where they went. By all accounts, they're in Turkey now. President Erdogan of Turkey has been welcoming, so Hamas has found a new base in Turkey. Question number two, why did they have to leave Qatar? Again, Qatar gave no answers, no reasons. They say that the Doha office was created for mediation. There are no ceasefire talks now. The process has been suspended, so the office has no use. Qatar says the office is not permanently closed, but right now, no one's there.
If a decision is taken to permanently close down the Hamas office in Qatar, then you will hear it from here or of a formal statement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
So that's the official statement. This is what Qatar is telling the world. But the subtext is loud and clear. Hamas was once welcome in Doha, now it is not. Which brings us to question number 3. What led to this? Like I said, Qatar backed Hamas for years. It gave them diplomatic support. It gave them a global platform via its state channel Al Jazeera, and it also gave them a lot of financial aid. Since 2007, Qatar has pumped nearly $1.8 billion into Gaza. Most of this was in the form of aid, subsidies, fuel, even kickbacks for the group. They also allowed Hamas leaders to stay in Doha. Their hotels were just minutes away from the Al Udeid base. Al Udeid is America's largest military base in West Asia. So this wasn't some hidden relationship. It was all out in the open. When Hamas attacked Israel, Doha did not condemn the attack. In fact, they blamed Israel. They said, and I'm quoting, Israel is solely responsible for the escalation. But soon, Qatar also became the go-to mediator, trying to broker a ceasefire in Gaza. So the question is, what has changed now? Looks like it was pressure from the United States. Qatar's relationship with Hamas worked for one reason. Washington supported it. But it doesn't anymore, it seems. Reports suggest that the US wanted Qatar to distance itself from Hamas, and Qatar complied.
I will let the various relevant governments speak to where they are. I know the government of Qatar has spoken to this to some extent. I've seen the reports that some of the leadership of Hamas who had been in Doha have now moved to Turkey. I'm not in a position to dispute those reports. What I would say on behalf of the United States is that we don't believe the leaders of a vicious terrorist organization should be living comfortably anywhere.
So first, Qatar suspended the mediation efforts, and then it expelled Hamas leaders. It may not be a permanent breakup, but it just shows that the relationship had become a diplomatic liability for the Qataris. But where does it leave Hamas? Their top leaders are dead. Their leadership is now scattered. Most of them are keeping a low profile, and now they've lost one of their biggest financial backers. So Hamas has two options, really. Continue the war and suffer the consequences, or call for a ceasefire. And they seem to be leaning towards the second option, calling for a ceasefire. Hamas says it is ready for a ceasefire. In return, it wants a full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. The problem is, Israel doesn't agree to this, which is why Hamas is now appealing to US President-elect Donald Trump. They say Trump should put pressure on Israel. But will it work? We'll find out in a few months. Staying with the US, Donald Trump has announced some more names. He has chosen some more members of his cabinet. First, there's Linda McMahon, the nominee for Education Secretary. She's the former CEO of World Wrestling Entertainment, WWE. And she has an important job to dismantle her own agency, and send education back to the states. During his election campaign, Donald Trump had promised to close the U.S. Department of Education. So now he has chosen a former wrestling CEO to give the department a tombstone pile driver. It's quite fitting. But as usual, Trump is facing criticism. His choices are making big news around the world. Why do Trump's picks cause so much controversy? Can he really choose anyone he wants? And is he really doing something absurd? Our next report breaks it down.
Linda McMahon is coming back. She will once again be a member of Donald Trump's administration. In 2016, she was chosen as the head of the Small Business Administration, America's SBA. This time, she will head the U.S. Department of Education. Linda McMahon is the former president and CEO of WWE, World Wrestling Entertainment. She ran the pro wrestling circuit along with her husband, Vince. The McMahons have a long history with Trump. Trump was once a regular celebrity guest on WWE. He even shaved Vince's head in the ring once. So their families are close. Linda was a part of the last Trump administration, and she will probably be Education Secretary this time around. There's only one thing standing in her way: a Senate confirmation. It doesn't matter that Linda McMahon isn't a member of the U.S. Congress. It doesn't matter that she isn't known for her work in the education sector. And it doesn't even matter that her job will be to tear her own department down. None of that makes a difference in the American political system. If the president chooses someone for a top job, only the US Senate can stand in their way. And since the Senate is led by Trump's Republican Party, that shouldn't be an issue either. This is part of the reason why Trump's appointments keep making the news. Trump isn't shy about using the American system to his advantage. He can pick whoever he wants for the most crucial government roles, and they'll probably get the job. That's why you have vaccine skeptic Robert F. Kennedy Jr. coming in as America's health secretary. He'll be assisted by celebrity doctor and TV host Dr. Mehmet Oz. Trump picked Dr. Oz to lead America's Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS. The celebrity doctor will head an agency that received $1.4 trillion last year. Dr. Oz is a trained heart surgeon. He was once holed up for endorsing unproven weight loss pills, and he promoted anti-malaria medicine to fight COVID-19. Trump's opponents are accusing him of picking loyalty over ability and stuffing the government with his friends. But think about it for a second. How is this different from other parts of the world? Do other countries only pick highly qualified candidates for top government jobs? In India and Britain, what is the minimum criteria for a cabinet post? It's not educational qualification, nor is it experience in the field. Cabinet members just have to be members of parliament, members of the House of Commons or Lords in the UK, Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha in India. For lower house members, their qualification is that they managed to win an election. Upper house members don't even have that requirement. They're usually just elevated by the ruling party. So it isn't very different from the American system. Trump is basically doing away with the facade, the illusion of the highly qualified politician, by choosing a wrestling CEO as education secretary, a vaccine skeptic as the health secretary, or sex crime accused Matt Gaetz as attorney general. Trump is exposing the ridiculousness of the political system, and perhaps that is why his picks keep making global headlines.
Did you check the Indian markets today? If you haven't, don't bother, because the markets were closed today for elections in Maharashtra. It doesn't happen for other state elections, but it does happen for Maharashtra, and that sums up our next story. The battle for India's richest state and financial capital. Today was voting day there. Thousands of citizens lined up to cast their vote. Among them were celebrities and business tycoons, Bollywood actors, producers, singers, athletes. All of them turned up at the polling station. Take a look at this first. But the overall turnout was down around 58% last we checked. 58% voter turnout. To put that in context, the turnout was 61% in the last election. And now some background. Maharashtra has 288 assembly seats, so the majority mark is 145. That's what you need to get to form a government. There are two alliances in the fray. The first is the ruling Mahayuti. It includes Prime Minister Narendra Modi's party, the BJP, Chief Minister Eknath Shinde's party, the Shiv Sena, and a faction of the NCP, the Nationalist Congress Party. The second alliance is the Maha Vikas Aghadi. This includes the Congress Party, the Thackeray faction of the Shiv Sena, and another faction of the NCP. Sounds complicated, doesn't it? But it's a pretty muddled field in Maharashtra. You have family members contesting against each other, former party workers locking horns, and rivalries within alliances. The exit polls came out earlier today. This is what their average looks like. 151 seats for the ruling Mahayuti alliance, 129 seats for the Maha Vikas Aghadi, and 8 seats for other parties. Remember, these are exit polls, aka public enemy number one in recent times. They were wrong about the Lok Sabha election, also about the recent Haryana election. So keep that in mind. But why are we talking about it? On this show, we don't cover state elections in depth. So why this one? Well, because of two broad reasons. One, there's a lot at stake here. Like I said, Maharashtra is the richest state in India. Its economic output is $510 billion, which is higher than the GDP of countries like Egypt, Thailand and the UAE. Maharashtra also makes up 14% of India's GDP, plus more than 40% of direct tax revenue. The state is home to India's financial capital, Mumbai, which is also Asia's billionaire capital. There are 386 billionaires living in Mumbai. That's more than cities like Beijing and Singapore. Then you have financial institutions. The Reserve Bank of India's headquarters is in Mumbai. So is the National Stock Exchange. All of this makes Maharashtra a tantalizing prize. That's one reason why this election is worth looking at. Secondly, it's extra dramatic. I know Bollywood is based in Mumbai, but even they cannot write scripts like this. Just look at what happened on Tuesday. A senior BJP leader was accused of distributing cash in exchange for votes. He was staying at a hotel near Mumbai. Opposition workers and cops barged into the hotel. They caught him with bundles of cash. Take a look at this. The leader has denied the charge, of course, but poll officials are not convinced. They have recovered around 10 lakh rupees from the hotel. So a case has been filed against the BJP leader in question. Then today, another row broke out, this time involving the opposition. A former police officer accused opposition leaders of siphoning bitcoins. He's also released a voice clip as evidence. He says it features NCP leader Supriya Sule. Again, she too has denied the charge. She's also filed a case against this ex-cop. Now remember when all of this is happening. The first incident happened hours before polls opened. The second one happened today during voting. It tells you how intense the battle is. But it also reveals a deeper problem, the problem of money in elections. In 2019, poll officials seized 103 crore rupees from Maharashtra. This is cash plus liquor plus drugs plus freebies. Basically, illegal vote-catching incentives. And this time they seized more than 660 crore rupees, which is more than 6 times higher than 2019. If this is because of extra vigilance than the last time, great. But if it's because money power is growing, it is bad news. Along with Maharashtra, the state of Jharkhand also voted today. This is the second round of state elections after the general election in India. We'll get the results on Saturday. It promises to be a super weekend. Now let's shift our focus to Guyana. Prime Minister Modi is visiting the Caribbean nation today. It is the final stop of his 3-nation tour, and the first time in more than 50 years that an Indian Prime Minister is visiting Guyana. His itinerary is packed. Prime Minister Modi will meet leaders from 15 Caribbean nations. He's also set to receive the top honors of Guyana and Barbados. It is a sign of India's deepening ties with the Caribbean. But why is this region becoming so important for India? Is this about India's growing need for oil and its push for energy security? Here's our report.
Guyana was independent for just 2 years when Indira Gandhi visited this Caribbean country in 1968. It was a different era, and Guyana was a different country then. Today, it is witnessing an extraordinary economic boom. Just like India, Guyana is among the world's fastest growing economies. Both countries want to leverage each other's strengths. Thanks to their strong historical and cultural ties, India and Guyana are ready to write a new chapter in this relationship. Guyana's president himself has an Indian connection. Irfan Ali's ancestors were among the first Indians to migrate to Guyana. He went all out to welcome the Indian Prime Minister. President Ali was at the airport to personally receive PM Modi along with over a dozen members of his cabinet and Prime Ministers of Grenada and Barbados. The Indian Prime Minister also received a special welcome from the members of the Indian community. PM Modi is also being awarded the top honors of Guyana and Barbados. The Indian community serves as a bridge between the two nations. About 40% of Guyana's population is either Indian or of South Asian origin. This has allowed India to develop a deep relationship, especially on the energy front. It is believed that Guyana has 11 billion barrels worth of oil reserves. This puts the Caribbean nation among the top 20 with the largest oil reserves globally, and on par with countries like Norway, Brazil and Algeria. India imports around 80% of its crude needs. It needs diverse sources for crude, and Guyana could be a stable option.
Of understanding on the area of health.
So India is making strategic investments in Guyana. Earlier this year, both countries signed an agreement. It involves Indian companies like ONGC, which is India's state-owned and largest oil and gas company. They can get involved with Guyana's booming oil industry, participate in exploration, production and refining of crude.
India to enhance bilateral collaboration in the hydrocarbon sector.
Similarly, India is investing in the defence forces of Guyana. Before Prime Minister Modi's arrival, Guyana commissioned 2 aircraft from India. These will be used to conduct aerial surveillance. New Delhi had extended a line of credit for these aircraft to Guyana. Energy and defence form the 2 main pillars of this relationship. Both leaders are expanding on these fronts with more bilateral agreements and greater cooperation. With this visit, India appears ready to expand its global footprint.
People use the word legend a lot nowadays. Maybe it's a Gen Z thing. Social media influencers are legends, celebrity upstarts are legends, even untested athletes are promptly declared legends. But in reality, very few people actually deserve that title. Among them is Rafa Nadal. He played his final tennis match on Tuesday. The setting was perfect, a Davis Cup in his home country of Spain. But a fairy tale was not to be. Nadal lost his singles match against his Dutch opponent. There were tears and heartbreak in the crowd. After all, this wasn't a normal career. This was something special. Nadal has won 22 Grand Slam titles and 1 Olympic singles gold. He's won a record 14 French Open titles. And let's be honest here, nobody's breaking that record in a long, long time. But to judge Nadal by numbers is to downplay his genius. Because he wasn't just fighting his rivals, he was fighting his own body. A congenital foot condition, tendinitis of both knees, abdominal strains, elbow injuries, stress fractures and hip issues. Nadal's career was punctuated by major injuries. He had 3 times as many injuries as Novak Djokovic and 10 times as Roger Federer, but each time he fought back. He came back to conquer the tennis world. But as they say, Father Time comes for all. Nadal is 38 years old. His last Grand Slam title was in 2022, so perhaps he thought it was time to walk away. I'm sure experts will dissect Nadal's numbers and comebacks. But on Tuesday, he showed why he's a lot more than that. He said he wants to be remembered as a good person.
I think in some way I've tried to do something which for me is the most important thing in the world, and that's to be a good person. I hope that's how it came across to you. I'm truly leaving this world of professional tennis, having met so many friends along the way.
23 years. That's how long his career lasted. As he said, Nadal made many friends along the way. But one of them stands out because he wasn't just a friend. He was also Nadal's greatest rival on court, Roger Federer. Federer himself retired in 2022. Before Tuesday's match, he penned a letter for Nadal. Listen to what he wrote. Let's start with the obvious. You beat me a lot, more than I managed to beat you. You made me work harder than I ever thought I could just to hold my ground. You made me reimagine my game. always cracking each other up, wearing each other out on the court, and then sometimes, almost literally, having to hold each other up during trophy ceremonies. Look at the bottom of that letter. It says, "Your fan, Roger." This letter is just pure class, especially when you look at the history. Federer and Nadal faced each other 40 times, including 24 times in tournament finals. They battled hard on court. They cost each other titles, yet the respect was always there. We saw that in 2022 as well. Federer played his farewell tournament in London. His last match was a doubles, and his partner, Rafa Nadal. They ended up losing that match, but look at what happened afterwards. The greatest rivalry in tennis, arguably one of the greatest in any sport. And how did it end? With both men in tears together. It's a timely lesson for the world we live in. The world of so-called alpha males and podcast bros, where vulnerability is seen as weakness, where fairness is seen as unnecessary, and where rivalries go too far. In this world, Nadal showed a different path. Don't give an inch on court. Fight hard to prove your skill and talent, but off the court, be humble and gracious. We are lucky to have seen this rivalry play out. We are even luckier to have seen this friendship. So if you're a young kid out there, learn from Nadal and Federer how to win matches and hearts. And to Nadal, thank you for all the memories on court. Tennis fans around the world will miss you. Moving on to the world of art, where a cultural renaissance is unfolding. Leading the charge is West Asia. From Riyadh to Abu Dhabi, the region is taking claim as the next global hub for art. Saudi Crown Prince MBS is buying the world's most expensive painting. Sotheby's will hold its first auction in the country. Qatar is building a mammoth art collection. Abu Dhabi is investing heavily in museums. So cultural pivot is truly underway, but not without some criticism and allegations of art washing. Our next report tells you why.
It started out as any other auction for Christie's. The painting being sold, the Salvator Mundi. It's Latin for Savior of the World. For centuries, it was believed to be a copy or a work of one of Leonardo da Vinci's assistants. But that changed in 2005. A consortium of art dealers believed it was an authentic Da Vinci painting. Many dubbed it the male Mona Lisa. So in 2017, it went under the hammer. The bid started at $100 million. Soon, it hit $200 million. In the auction room, the crowds gasped. 200 became 300 and then 400. But the bidding continued. At $450 million, it finally ended. Salvator Mundi was not just sold, it became the most expensive artwork ever to appear at an auction. Since then, it's not been seen in public, which begs the million-dollar question, what happened to the Salvator Mundi? It's believed that the painting was bought by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and he has grand plans for it. MBS is planning to build a grand museum in Riyadh, sort of like the Louvre, and the star attraction will be the Salvator Mundi. What Mona Lisa is for the Louvre, this painting will be for the Saudi Museum. There's no official confirmation yet, but it's hard to deny that a cultural wave is sweeping through the sands. Take the Sotheby's, for example. It's a global art titan, one of the oldest and most recognizable firms of fine art auctioneers in the world.
$3 million.
Sotheby's is making history with its first ever auction in Saudi Arabia. It is scheduled for the 8th of February in Diriyah. The auction will feature everything from Saudi fine art to luxury collectibles, signaling a shift in the region's art market ambitions. Of course, this cultural pivot isn't accidental. Saudi Arabia is funneling billions of dollars into art initiatives. It's part of its Vision 2023, moving away from oil and diversifying its economy. Take the Museum of World Cultures, for example. It's set to open in 2026, and it wants to rival the Louvre. The former British Museum head is going to lead this museum. Also, Riyadh isn't alone. Across West Asia, nations are leveraging art to redefine their global identities. Abu Dhabi has invested heavily in the Louvre Abu Dhabi. Qatar is building one of the world's most extensive museum collections. Christie's already has a base in Dubai. Art Basel, another big name in the art world, wants to run the Abu Dhabi Fair. But not everyone is convinced. Critics argue that Saudi Arabia's cultural investments are a classic case of art washing, or using art to distract from its controversial human rights records. The criticism comes from Western institutions, the very same ones that house collections built on colonial looting. So it's almost ironic. And many say it's a case of sour grapes. Art has long been a tool of soft power. Until now, the West were the self-proclaimed guardians of the art world. For years, the Gulf countries were just a market for art. But now, West Asia is trumping them, no pun intended.
Do you know about the yo-yo effect? If you've tried to lose a few kilos, then you most likely do. Here's how it goes. You try a new diet, so you begin to lose weight. But after weeks or even months of successful slimming, you regain the lost weight. The kilos start piling up again, and soon you're back to where you started. These ups and downs in weight are called the yo-yo effect. It is the universal truth of weight loss. It is the reality of living with obesity. Yet what drives it has been a mystery. But scientists may finally have the answer. A new study has found the leading culprit, and it is memory. Not the one in your brain, I'm talking about the one in your fat cells. Apparently, fat tissues have memory, a biological memory, so to speak. So even if you lose weight, the fat remembers past obesity. It behaves as if the body is still obese. It resists attempts to lose more weight. And when you eat, the fat absorbs nutrients more swiftly, almost like a sponge soaking water. So the fat tissue grows faster, making people gain weight more quickly. Simply put, obesity alters your body at the cellular level. It changes how fat tissues respond to food, which is why even if you manage to shed some body weight, it is harder to keep it all from coming back. Now, from an evolutionary perspective, all of this does make sense. Historically, food was scarce, so humans had to defend their body weight, not lose it. They were programmed to keep it, which is why our cells have adapted to gain weight quickly. This has helped us survive. But in today's age, when food, especially junk food, is everywhere, our fatty memories are fueling a crisis. More than 1 billion people are living with obesity the world over. In the US and in India, nearly 3/4 of the population is overweight or obese. In the UK, nearly two-thirds. And in China, half the population. In fact, half the world is on track to be overweight by 2035, meaning the likelihood of a range of diseases will increase, including diabetes, cancer, heart and kidney disease, and it will cost the global economy. How much? About $3 trillion every year. Yet, we are unable to fight obesity. And there are two reasons why. The first is apathy. Yes, cellular memory is to blame, but it's not alone. Obesity comes from a number of factors. There are environmental, social, and physiological reasons, like the wide availability of junk food, sedentary lifestyles, poor environment, pollution, and so on. Obesity is not a personal problem. It is a policy issue. Yet our policies do not tackle these preventable factors. Instead, we blame, we accuse, we judge, we overtreat and undertreat the obese. Which brings me to the second reason. We don't understand obesity. It has been an epidemic for 30 years now, but medicine still doesn't know who is sick or why exactly they're obese. The scientific understanding of obesity is constantly evolving. Until recently, we did not know that fat cells have memory. Just as we did not know that even the bacteria in your gut can remember obesity, or that some kinds of obesity are worse than the others, that body shape matters, that ethnicity matters, that some people have slow metabolism, which is not an excuse, it actually increases the risk of obesity. We know so little about obesity that we don't even know how to define it. Have you heard of Novo Nordisk? It is the maker of blockbuster drugs Ozempic and Wegovy. These are weight loss jabs. Novo Nordisk is a Danish company, but obesity is not considered a disease in Denmark. It is classified as a risk factor. Do you see the problem here? Obesity is perpetually living through an identity crisis. People are rarely on the same page. But there is one thing that we can agree on. Our understanding of obesity and how best to treat it is evolving for the better. We now know that this is not just a problem of calories in and calories out. It is much more nuanced. So now is the time to act on these gains, to try and shed the burden of obesity. Another G20 summit has ended, this time in Brazil. As you know, the G20 brings together dozens of world leaders. So the mood tends to be serious and businesslike, but we did see some lighter moments in Rio, from Joe Biden wandering aimlessly into the Amazon jungle to a few leaders missing the G20 family photo. This summit also had its moments. Take a look. Now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Donald Trump joins Elon Musk as SpaceX launches the world's most powerful rocket. In Greece, thousands of workers march demanding better pay and living standards, and Russia gifts dozens of zoo animals to North Korea. Finally, we're taking you back in history on this day in 1945. The Nuremberg trials began in Germany. 24 high-ranking Nazis went on trial for war crimes during the Second World War. This was the first trial of its kind in history, conducted by an international tribunal. 12 of them were later sentenced to death. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
To sustain the master race in their war-making, they enslave.
Goering seems to be taking voluminous notes of this evidence is placed before the tribunal.
21 survivors of Hitler's Guard make their final pleas before...
Dass ich alles, was geschehen sei, nun ist das Völkerrecht aber einheitlich.
Calmly and in strong terms, Goering pleads for the German people, regardless of what...
Former Luftwaffe chief is outwardly calm and unshaken as the American prosecutor...